pleasure. He is currently the Executive Director of St. Luke's Health Initiatives, and he's been there since 1995. He has years of experience in the philanthropic and nonprofit sector. We won't go into all the details of that. But if you have a chance to ever chat with Robert, I think he's one of the most thoughtful and insightful of funders that I've had the pleasure of meeting. And I also know that he's one of the most provocative moderators, and that's why we chose him here today to keep conversation going. And so without further ado, Roger, I turn it over to you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Delighted to see so many folks here. When I came to town in late 1995, I went to my first meeting of the Arizona Grantmakers Forum, and I think there was exactly 12 people gathered around a small meeting table and debating such issues as, do you think we ought to have a speaker? And we kind of talked about what we were doing and who was new and what foundations were coming online. And that was when John Murphy and Steve Mittenfall suggested that, well, Roger, you know, we've been informally hosting this organization for a while. Now it's your turn. And of course I figured if I was going to get involved, the first thing we were going to do was get somebody there to handle all the logistics. And that's when we contracted with Marissa as a part-time person. And I think, what was that, Marissa? That was probably 98, 99 or so. And that was right about the time, too, that the Podium Charitable Trust and soon thereafter the Piper Charitable Trust were getting started. And that was the beginning of really the kind of what I would call the formal birth of this organization into a full-fledged organization that it is today. So I'm just delighted to see so many folks here. It's really a celebration of that, and it's also a celebration of the growth of philanthropy in Arizona over the past 10 years. Some of you may not know that I started off to be a philosophy teacher, and I couldn't find a job. So I passed myself off as a fundraiser. I said, you know, I dress up fairly well. I can talk out of both sides of my mouth relatively easily. And I worked as a fundraiser for about 10 years. And during that time, I called on a number of foundations, also people with significant resources, as we say in the biz. And I used to think, God, if I could only give it away. If I could only get one of those jobs at those foundation execs. And as the saying goes, you got to be careful what you dream about because it may come true. And I have to candidly say, I like doing this better than raising money. But I want to tell you one other thing, is that the thing that I really appreciated about raising, the years that I spent raising money, is that it had a defined bottom line. At the end of the year, I knew when I was successful. And one of the things from my experience, and I certainly appreciate your thoughts on this too, is from my perspective, one of the issues with the foundation world and philanthropy on the grant-making side is there is no defined bottom line. And in fact, the whole exercise is about finding the bottom line. It's an exercise in moral philosophy, because we're looking at multiple versions of the good. It's all worthwhile, it's all good, but as they say, what is gooder than something else, and how do we determine it? And that's kind of the challenge that I think we all face in setting our own priorities and our own investments. Today we're going to be talking with two seasoned foundation executives who run, at least currently, the two largest philanthropies is in Arizona in terms of asset size. Both have been in business for 5 or 6 years, and we're going to hear from them in terms of their own experiences, their own challenges, but more importantly, we're going to give you an opportunity not only to ask questions and to find out more about the Piper and Pulliam Trust, but also to have a dialogue about how we can together with our financial and our human, our strategic resources, how we can affect positive change in Arizona in the years of ahead. And the way we're going to get that done, ladies and gentlemen, is by working together, not working in our own silos. So with that, I'm going to just briefly tell you a little bit about Judy and Ed. And then I'm just going to ask a few questions to get things started. But I'm counting on you to chime in here with comments, questions, provocations, whatever turns you on. And if I don't hear some of these things, I'm going to be out there asking people I know in the audience to make a few comments. The first person I want to introduce is Ed Portnoy, who is Director of Grants Programs for the Nina Mason Pulliam Charitable Trust. The thing I learned about Ed, and I guess I didn't know this, I knew you worked at Scottsdale in terms of their grants, but I didn't know that you were actually the originator of that little thing you check off if you live in Scottsdale. You want to increase your $1 to the contribution for city programs, which was a brilliant idea, and it's raised well over $1 million since it was started. So if you check off that box, you live in Scottsdale, and you put another $1 on your bill, Ed is the one to thank for that. Ed is a citizen of Scottsdale. He lives there with his wife, Joan, and his son, Zach. He has 3 grown daughters. He is a graduate of the University of Oregon with a degree in Community Service and Public Affairs, and he's also a graduate of Ohio State University, where he majored in education and received both his master's and his PhD. As I indicated, he spent a long tenure with the city of Scottsdale, first as the executive assistant to Mayor Drinkwater while he was in office, and he was the first manager of the Youth and Family Services Department. In addition to overseeing all grant programs for Pulliam here in Scottsdale, as you know, Pulliam is also in Indianapolis. He oversees and is the liaison for their Nina Scholars Program, and I think he might want to tell you a little bit about that and what they're doing in that area. He's a longtime community volunteer, very active with the United Way, and he's also been a member and the chair of the MAG Human Services Technical Committee for a number of years. Judy Moraz is president and CEO of the Virginia G. Piper Charitable Trust. And prior to joining the trust in 2000, Judy was president of Goucher College in Baltimore. One of the things that endears her to me is that she is a historian, and she is a student of literature and history, and which to me is kind of a solid grounding for a work in the ambiguities of this sort. And she has a PhD from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Judy is the immediate past president of the Arizona Grantmakers Club, and in fact it was under her leadership that I think we saw our most significant growth. She's also very active in the Council on Foundations. She is currently chair of the Legislation and Regulation Committee of that national organization. So she's both active here locally with grantmakers and also nationally. So the first thing, my friends, is that I would like each of you just to spend a few minutes telling the audience how you got started, what the organization's focus is, what are your areas of interest, What are your guidelines? And then the next thing I'd like to move into is what you knew when you came in. What's changed after, I mean, both for the good and for the maybe not so good in the past 5 years. So if we can just start off with an introduction of the organization. Ed, why don't we get started with you?
Roger, thank you. Let me preface any comments I'm going to make by saying that any questions that you do not get answered today, you can call our office at 955-3000, that's area code 602, and we would be happy to talk with any of you. Let me introduce Bob Berger and Lynn Martinez, who are sitting over there, our two other grants folks in our grants team, and any one of us can answer questions. So let me just start off by saying that. Just a little bit about trust. Nina Mason Pulliam died in 1997 and left her fortune to establish our foundation, and did so with the idea that her fortune should serve the people who live in Arizona and Indiana, specifically in Phoenix and Indianapolis. The reasons for this: she was the third wife of Eugene Pulliam, who owned Central Newspapers, and the two flagship papers are the Arizona Republic and the Indianapolis Star. Because of that, she wanted that fortune to serve those people. She lived in both communities, contributed heavily in both communities, and wanted her legacy to go on, basically serving those two. So she died in 1997. Eugene Pulliam died in 1975, by the way, and when he died, she took over the Arizona Republic as the publisher. She was an astute businesswoman. She was a leader in her field. She was the first female licensed pilot in Indiana. She was a real groundbreaker. She was a tough business person with a heart of gold. She had appointed Frank Russell, who was chairman of the board of Central Newspapers, as the chairman, to become the chairman of the trust and trustee, and left it up to Mr. Russell, Frank, to appoint the other two trustees. He appointed Nancy Russell. Nancy was a longtime friend of Nina's, and Carol Schatt, who is Mrs. Pulliam's niece. And so we have three trustees who basically all knew Nina very well and have interpreted her wishes, and it's through their guidance that we work as a foundation. They established three basic priority areas for our trust: helping people in need, protecting animals and nature, and enriching community. Our trustees said that we would never have quotas in each one of those areas, that we should always fund what's most promising in each community. What we did lay out, though, was the fact that we would fund equally in both communities. When our trust started, I think we were a $290 million trust. That grew to slightly over $400 million, dipped down under $200 million, and hopefully we're on our way back now with a grants budget this year of about $13.2 million, distributed equally again between Indiana and Arizona. Within those three priority areas, and just looking back on our grants history since we really became a functioning foundation in 1999, for the last 3 years, over 80% of our funds have gone to the helping people in need category. Women's programs, children's programs, issues around homelessness, basic survival skills in communities. We've been very strong in those programs as we've looked out upon the needs of our communities. And again, balancing Arizona and Indiana is a difficult job because Arizona is an emergent community. Our population is exploding. We have new communities being built. We have new people arriving all the time. We have a nonprofit community that continues to grow. And so our job is quite different than it is in Indiana, where that community has been around so long. For those of you who've been in Indianapolis, if you've been to Monument Circle was built before Arizona became a state. And so they had quite a lot of advancement, quite a lot of infrastructure compared to Arizona. So our job is quite different. In the time since we've been accepting competitive grants since 1999, we've reviewed about 2,300 applications in both states. And because of that, I now wear glasses, and I see that you're wearing glasses too. And but we review them all with the hopes of being able to find the nuggets that serve a community. When you look at our job, we basically will try to implement those kinds of programs and fund those kinds of organizations who live by those values and exemplify the kind of charity and giving that Mrs. Pulliam did in her lifetime. So we're very much donor-based in the sense of our benefactress, Mrs. Pulliam, and we respect those wishes, and we try to make our grants along those ways. Roger, you asked how our view of things have changed since we started with the trust. I came from about 20 years of making grants, both on a municipal level, with United Way making recommendations, with MAG Human Services Technical Committee, and I thought this would just be an easy transfer. I know Harriet Ivey, our president and CEO, when I asked her about this, she said, well, don't worry about it. It's basically with the trust, you'll just add a couple more zeros on the end of the check, and it's basically the same process. But it's not. With the city of Scottsdale, it was a very small community that we were dealing with, a population of 200,000. With a trust, we have interest areas that are far beyond basic needs and human service areas. We have a major commitment with the environmental programs, with the protecting animals and nature, a totally new area than I had ever funded. We also have a global perspective, I think, and so what has changed for me is really being able to look systematically at how each program, each request affects the entire community, how one organization impacts another, where one ends and another begins, and gaining the perspective over 6 years. This is my 6th year with the Trust. Gaining the perspective over time of how they fit in contextually within a larger community. That's probably the most difficult job, but I think the longer you work and the more you review applications in similar fields and similar areas, we start asking those kinds of questions. Do you know about this other organization? What kind of collaborations have you started within this field? What other kinds of services are available for the clientele that you're talking about? So we really know now how to ask certain questions that probably 6 years ago we weren't quite as good about asking. So as our knowledge grows, hopefully organizations grow in their knowledge about us, and we grow in our knowledge about them, so we can do a better job of matching proposals with what our intent and values are. So in a nutshell, that's it.
Thanks, Ed. Let's see if it's going.
First of all, if anybody has
Questions? Like this one. Anybody has questions about the Piper Trust? I want every one of my colleagues in the Piper Trust to raise their hands, because those are the people you need to talk to. Okay, so we have a little cabal there and there and over here. Those are the people who will really know the answers. I also have to tell you, I'm terrified at speaking to a group of nonprofit leaders, not because I'm worried about public speaking, but when I first came to the Valley in the fall of 2000, and this brand new trust was open, the ASU Center for Nonprofit Leadership asked me to speak at their nonprofit day. So, we didn't have our guidelines. We barely had our furniture, and they had asked for me to speak about collaboration, which I did, because Baltimore had some stunning examples of nonprofits collaborating. And at the end, one of the nonprofit people went up and asked for his money back because he said that he had come to find out how he could get a grant from the Piper Trust, and this other was really extraneous. So if you really came to find out how to get a grant from the Piper Trust, go talk to these folks. In interesting ways, there are parallels between the two foundations, both, I think, founded by remarkable women who took philanthropy very seriously. Virginia Piper grew up in the Midwest, very much grounded in Midwestern values to the very end. She married Paul Galvin, who was the founder of Motorola in 1946, 45, and really began to learn philanthropy from him. And when he died in 1959, he gave her the opportunity, if she wanted it, to lead his foundation, which had a sunset clause, and ours does as well. When she established her own trust, she put a 50-year limit on it. 10 years after Paul's death, she married Ken Piper, a Motorola vice president, so that's where the Piper name came from. And they moved to Arizona. Motorola was expanding into the state. And she became very involved and committed to this community. Ken died in '75, so the last really 25 years of her life, she lived in Paradise Valley and very quietly went about her work. She took it very seriously. She sat at her desk for hours every day. She did all of her own typing. My favorite story is she put initials down by her initials on all the letters so they looked like she had a secretary, so she thought people would take her more seriously. She gave in 6 areas, what we call the core areas of children, education, health and medical research, arts and culture, older adults, and religion. And when she established the trust, which was formally established in 1995, but really didn't operate until her death in 1999, she identified 4 lifetime trustees. And one of the most interesting things about our foundation, I think, is how the governance has evolved, as well as how our programs have evolved. And I think it's enormous credit to our trustees who decided, because they had no restrictions whatsoever, and she gave them enormous latitude. They have determined over the last 5 years that they really need to expand their numbers. They wanted greater diversity, they wanted broader perspectives, and so last year they added the first non-lifetime trustee, term trustee, and then 2 months ago they added 2 more. So we're now at our maximum of 7. But that whole governance process has been, I think, one of the very interesting things, because oftentimes I think at the end of the day, the trustees can determine whether a foundation is truly going to maximize its resources or not. The staff certainly plays a key role, but if there is not that breadth of vision and openness to risk-taking and willingness to grow and make mistakes, then I think a foundation can do very good work. But whether it will maximize its resources is really the question. We opened our doors, as I said, in the fall of 2000. I was not from Arizona, and we didn't know really what. We knew all the challenges were out there, but how could we shape our own guidelines? She had left about $580 million, and the trustees had determined that this should be directed right here in Maricopa County, which was one of the things that really drew me to the position, because my sense was, being place-based, we could play a number of roles in the community beyond grant making, that we could be a real partner with nonprofits. We could work in the community in a variety of ways, as a convener, as an educator, as a catalyst, as well as a grant maker. So we went out for a series of community conversations, and out of that, defined the initiative areas that we would focus the majority of our grant making on in our early years: early childhood, youth, older adults, and then strengthening the infrastructure of arts and culture. One of the strongest messages from the community conversations was that there was far more money for crisis intervention than prevention. So if you look at our grants, there's a real orientation toward trying to be preventive, proactive, as opposed to come in on the other end of tragedies and crises. I think the one thing that I would say about how our grant making has changed over the last 5 years, and we've given about a little over 400 grants. About $129 million, almost all of it here in Maricopa County. Every once in a while you'll see an outlier, and that's with a nonprofit that Mrs. Piper or the Galvin family had ties with, but otherwise we're very focused here. I think what has changed principally When we came in, and we knew we didn't want to be a mile wide and an inch deep, our major goal was to try to make good grants, listening carefully to the nonprofits, seeing what were their needs, what were their best ideas, and trying to respond and fund. We will always continue to do that. Just not a question. But as we've grown a little and are not quite so chartreuse green, we have begun to look at national best practices and try to bring them to the Valley. We have begun to initiate our own sort of strategies and our own initiatives and fund them sort of separate from the nonprofits. Let me give you the case in point that we're piloting right now, and then I'll be quiet and let. But it does show the evolution, and I would say we will evolve further. But we have an initiative going now, New Parents Kit. One of our program officers, Mary Lee Del Pra, knew that this had occurred in California with tobacco money. Rob Reiner is I Am Your Child. And so the decision was, and Berkeley had evaluated it, looked like these kits really affected how at least new parents read it, knew what the resources were available to them, had 6 DVDs, a little, fat little book that you could start reading to your infant early on. So we're piloting it this summer in several local hospitals for new parents. If it's effective, and evaluation is just cardinal. The first person I hired was the Director of Research and Evaluation, and so we really try to build that in our work. If it proves to be effective in changing parental behavior, then we'll take it countywide. So that's sort of how we're moving into a different direction. We can talk about others that we have that are sort of cooking on front and back burners, when we get into the question and answer. But I would say we're a little more confident about making longer term commitments, and not just being in and out in 1 or 2 years or 3 years, which is what a lot of our grants have looked like. Always having to have an exit strategy, but I think you'll see more long-term initiatives over the next few years.
Well, good. We've got a couple of possible topics we could pursue. I noticed, Judy, you mentioned mistakes as well as failures. What have been some mistakes? Have you made any mistakes?
Thank you, Roger. Well, we consider risk-taking part of our mission. Mrs. Pulliam was a risk-taker. Our trustees support risk in terms of our grant making. We support organizations in their startup. And so how you define mistakes is an interesting question. We don't look at failure or an organization going out of business, for example, as a mistake. But it's something to learn from. But we will support organizations in their first 3 years of operation with operating support. And I think it's we don't want to see anybody go out of business, obviously. But we will take a risk with an organization. When we look at the service, I think what we look at first is really the service and the essential nature of the service and what role that plays in the community, more so than the organization initially. So if we see that an organization is really serving a need with an underserved population or filling a gap where no other services exist, we would rather make sure that those services are there and then work with the organization to hopefully increase their capacity. And I'd also say that when we have an investment with an organization, in terms of mistakes, we know that certain organizations have rocky times that they go through. I think we're more likely to continue working with an organization who's on a downturn that we have an investment with, as opposed to looking at a group that's been around for quite a while. So I think if we do have a significant investment with an organization, we'll stay the course with them.
we have made mistakes, and we have learned, we hope, from some of them. I'll give you some specific examples that have really informed now some of our practices. One of them was a first-rate organization that had a grant with us, and basically, for a variety of reasons, deep in the bowels of the organization, the project wasn't happening. It's about as basic as you can make it. It took a while for us to sort out with the nonprofit exactly how this could have happened, and it helped them really refine their own internal controls. But at a fairly, delicate meeting, when we're all sitting down because the money's coming back, projects failed, these are not happy moments for anybody. I mean, it's just, we said, how can we learn from this? And they said, so often in significant sized organizations, not everyone who needs to know should know what the real specifications of that grant are, what expectations are, what it's all about. And so out of that conversation, we decided we would do something that not everyone is in love with. We'll find out whether the nonprofits really like it this summer when we invite people to come in and have a free breakfast and tell us a lot of feedback. But we started something called the Piper 201s. The 101s are the sort of open orientation. Anybody who wants to come on the first Wednesday can come and learn about how we do our grants, what we fund, what makes strong proposals. As a recovering academic, of course, we had to have a 201. And this is one where we invite the executive director and a member of the board to come in, and if there's a project manager in a large organization, to come in and sit with our program officers to talk about, what are the expectations of the grant? If an executive director changes, do we need to know? Some of those issues about forging a partnership that's based on clarity and based on common understanding of the roles of both the foundation and the nonprofit. We think this has helped a good deal in clarifying things where we will see, but that really came out of a mistake. That old adage, do no harm. We've done harm, at least once, much to our chagrin and the nonprofit. And that is, we funded what looked like a terrific program that allowed a nonprofit to expand its services, desperately needed in this community, in a pretty dramatic way of ramping up. In point of fact, it was too fast. They really suffered by overreaching too quickly. It's all worked out fine in the end, but it was a reminder to us that we've got to be very careful that grants can do harm as well as do good. We're very reluctant now because we've discovered that very small, fragile organizations that want to hire a development director and for them by year 2 to raise their own salary. If the foundation will put in year 1, surely by year 2 they'll be ready to raise their own. That usually doesn't happen, and that can do damage as well. So we've learned from some of these mistakes and try not to do it. We're very wary now of major campaigns that cause a large expansion of the physical plant unless the operating dollars are built into that campaign as well. All of us in this room know of organizations here that have had very handsome buildings that they couldn't really afford to run. And the trust shouldn't be a partner in that kind of seductive, because it is seductive, behavior.
Well, what are some of the, you've heard a little talk about what these foundations do, some of the things that they've learned, but I know there are a number of non-profits who are interested in how they can form a relationship with one of these trusts and perhaps other funders that are in the room. Let me ask you and see if we can get some discussion started here. Judy mentioned the idea of being a partner. How can you have a partnership between unequals? What is the relationship between approaching an organization with a significant source of money, it's controlling the purse strings, and you're a nonprofit leader out there that frankly needs core operating support and it needs a diversified funding stream? What do we mean by partnerships, and how do you determine those? For example, when you look at proposals, I mean, Ed, do you think in terms of your grant making in terms of partnerships? I know Judy does, and what are some of the others you think about that?
I'll just say real briefly, again, from our trustee perspective, we have, when we go through, we have 3 grant cycles a year, by the way. When we go through a grant cycle, we have a check presentation ceremony where basically our trustees welcome new grantees into the Knight of Mason Pulliam family. They consider them family members, even more so than just a partnership. But I think it all starts with communication. And I think that's what we try to impress upon the grantee at the preliminary proposal stage, is to contact us, to talk to us, to share your ideas with us, so that we can together help define what it is that will put your organization in the best light. Doesn't mean that we will fund you, but certainly we can talk through our proposal process. As we say, when you write your proposal to us, especially what we do is we go through preliminary proposals. This last round we had 72. We've just selected about 21 to recommend to our trustees for full proposals. When we get to that full proposal stage, which is quite an extensive application, we will work with you extensively. And I know a lot of organizations will call us and with real fear that they have done it wrong. And what we will tell them is don't worry about it. If it's incorrect, we'll ask you for the correct information. If you send us the wrong information, then we'll tell you exactly what it is that we want. We will work with you so that we put you into the best light, so that you can present yourself in the best light, so we can make a good choice. Following that, after the grant is made, we again want to have that continued communication with you. We don't want to be surprised by anything that's going on, and share your good news as well as bad news, and we'll continue to work with you.
I think this question of partnership is very real. And we all know that at the end of the day, however hard a foundation works to make it a level playing field of one based on equity, somebody's got the money, and somebody needs the money. And so, that dynamic is a tricky one. I guess how, Roger, we've approached it, we've tried to be as open and candid about how we do our work as we can be. When I was on the other side of the table raising money, I went to foundations where I had the very distinct feeling that if I did not have all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, I was going to be dead from the beginning. There was going to be no creative conversation about the project, about the needs. There would be no discussion of, have you looked at so-and-so, have you talked to so-and-so, they're doing the same thing. Whereas in other foundations, there was that real atmosphere of support, of respect, of engagement with the nonprofit, and a desire to make it as open. So those are the sorts of things that we've tried very hard to do. And as Ed is saying, this communication, this constant sort of, we urge nonprofits to come in and talk to us before they submit a letter of inquiry. Let's work together on this. So I think you ask a hard, good question. And we just keep trying. But I think nonprofits can tell us how we can be better partners, and we should be listening when they're willing, when they believe they're in a safe enough environment to tell us.
Right.
Good. Let's have, you're in a safe environment today. So speak up. That's what we want you to do.
I'm Sharon Cole, Minister of Energy Services and Funding. I love what you're talking about as far as evaluation. And I wonder, how do you share the findings when after you've funded a program in partnership and then you do that evaluation? Is there a certain methodology? Do you hire it out? And then are those research results something that you can share? Because for many of us, we're a one-shop corporate foundation, and the piece that we're very weak on is that evaluation. And we often spend a lot of time with our grant partners about how to strengthen.
I'm going to say something real quickly, and then I'm going to turn to my colleague, Dr. Wayne Parker, who's our Director of Evaluation. We don't evaluate all of our grants. We evaluate the ones that we monitor all of them. I mean, that would scare a trustee to death if they thought we weren't. And we have final reports. But evaluation for us is a pretty intricate process of using metrics and question tools and all of the kind of evaluation tools. So far, they're shared with the nonprofit. And sometimes they reshape how they may be doing a program. And other times they are so dramatic in showing the effectiveness that becomes the basis to go out and get a grant elsewhere. What we are struggling with, and Wayne, just get ready to jump in here. Here's the tricky one we can't figure out yet. And if you all have any thoughts, you tell us. Our first inclination was to put these evaluation results on our website. Again, that idea of transparency. Let's just put it out there. We're reluctant to, because this is a small town, even though we're the 5th largest, city, and it's pretty easy to identify, even if you don't say what that nonprofit is. You say, well, they tried to do X. They mentored students, and their reading scores have gone down rather than up. Now, we had one like that. Now, the happy end of that one is they already knew something was amiss and were changing their program. But you put that on a website for public dissemination, and I think we may do harm. So, Sharon, we'll be happy to talk individually, and about how to do something quick and dirty, but we're still not sure how to disseminate it as well as we'd like. Wayne, would you want to add?
Yeah, just real quickly. Evaluation for us is more than giving a grade. This one passed and this one failed. Part of evaluation is giving people ongoing feedback, and that requires that the information that they give be honest and credible, or the whole point of the feedback loop is destroyed. And basically, we're looking for bright, creative, resourceful people to have long-term relationships with, rather than grading a project. A particular project may not meet its goals, may not be successful, but one of the things we've learned in the process is that these are really good people to work with. We have good ideas, and we can work on a different project if this one isn't as successful. Anything which undermines getting honest, real data so that we can give feedback on what's working and what isn't is counterproductive. And as a result, I started out sort of looking at RWJ, Robert Wood Johnson, as an example. They put everything on their web. But they're dealing with multiple cities, with multiple sites, and you can't tell if something went badly where you can put the responsibility. And that isn't how we do it here. We're typically dealing with one site, with one organization, and results. And there are times when a project didn't go well, that the evaluation was helpful for us and for the organization, And how to disseminate that has been a real problem outside of the organization.
I'd like to respond to Roger's question about partnership. I'm a nonprofit consultant, and I'm looking at it from their side, and I'm really pleased that you guys do encourage that dialogue before. I've suggested to them that when they meet with you, that they start with your goals and what you're wanting to accomplish. And what's happened when we do that,
It's on, it's just still not done.
what happens when they do that is that a lot of times they find things that we would never have thought to bring to the funder, and the funder never would have realized that we were a resource to help them accomplish that. And it also really helps find where is that fit. And if it's not a fit, then we don't want to waste your time or ours. It also helps find where are the really good matches where we're trying to accomplish the same thing from a different perspective.
Yes,
I like hearing about the maturity of
can I ask you to speak up, please, if possible, maybe stand and introduce yourself so everyone knows.
My name is Meredith Beers. I'm a host of a nonprofit in Phoenix.
It's still not working.
Anyway, I've also been in the nonprofit arena for 20 years in the state of Arizona. And what I've seen is the same kind of maturity happening within a lot of nonprofits. The learning from the mistakes, from not communicating, from being afraid of the funders, from not wanting to share the bad results maybe. And but given the way the economy is going and the new administration and some of the changes that will be happening nationally and the market and housing in particular, we are also having to do what you said your governing board does. We're having to look at taking risks, broadening our vision, which doesn't mean jumping into a field that we have no business being in, but broadening our vision, including those kinds of partnerships, and also a willingness to grow, which may mean letting some things that we do go. So in terms of leveling the playing field, I think we know that the risk the funding source takes means as much to you as our risk does to us in the partnership. And so if I think when agencies mature, they understand that their risk is just as important as an agency as what is being funded in the funding source. So I just wanted to say we're there.
Yes.
My name's Peggy Mullen. I'm from the Beatitudes campus in Phoenix, and our organization is lucky enough to have received a very generous grant from both Piper and Pulliam Charitable Trusts. And when I think about partnership, I think about the core values of our organization. We have 4 core values: compassion, accountability, respect, and excellence. And I think the partnership that we have struck thus far with both charitable trusts have to do with accountability and respect. We've had the occasion to go back and modify our request with both organizations, because as we continued our development program, our redevelopment program of our campus, some of the parameters changed, or some of the realities of such an enormous project ended up changing. And while it's always a little bit humbling to go back and say, you know, we figured a little wrong, I think there's an accountability that we have to be extremely honest and forthright with our funders. And I think the funders bear the responsibility of respectfully hearing that, knowing that we, as providers in the community or professionals in whatever field we are all in, are being prudent if we're changing a plan and changing a request. So there's that exchange of accountability on both sides and respect certainly on both sides. I think candor is probably the biggest thing. And when I look back, you were asked earlier, Roger, about the mistakes that were made. If I look back, we would probably want to be better partners by meeting more frequently and saying, this is what's going on, and you've actually had more experience than we have in this, in managing a relationship like this. So I guess I would become a little more frequent communicator, but I really think that there is a sense of partnership. There seems to be great understanding in our existing relationships that we can't do everything we want to do without the help of these foundations. And on the other hand, they're impotent without the nonprofit community as well. So I see it really as a level playing field.
Good point. Thank you.
Other comments, other issues of concern? Yes.
Hi, Deborah P. Wisconsin Healthcare. And in terms of partnership, I was just wondering if the key foundations have talked at all about a cross-cutting theme that they would join on and focus on for a particular year. And with the understanding and the respect that you all have perhaps different priorities, but if there has been some thought given to a cross-cutting effort and focus for a particular given period of time.
Let me answer that, not for a year, but one thing we haven't touched on so far that I think has changed in the philanthropic community over the last 5 years. We're not only delighted and encouraging of nonprofits collaborating, and Lois Savage from Lodestar is just, right at the front of that parade, but there's a lot more collaboration going on among the foundations themselves. And so I think, Deb, to answer your question, if you look at the partnership that Flynn and Piper have on Maricopa Partnership for Arts and Culture, that's probably going to be a 4-year project. And we really went in it together, cross-cutting. We've done some other collaborations with St. Luke's Health and Legacy on health. So I don't know that we'll ever take a year and say, this is all we're going to give in that year, because that's really not the way, we do multi-year, all that. But you will see more shared kind of work together.
I would just add that what I've seen over the last several years is really a change in thinking about some of the big major problems and a lot more public-private partnerships. When I look at the Human Services Campus that the county took leadership on, but certainly your foundation and ours, Judy, and several others took part in, what I see the governor doing with the School Readiness Task Force and Early Childhood Education, the Early Childhood Fund, now a college scholarship fund that Rodell and Don Bunninger put together. Really looking at if we're really going to sit down and solve some of these issues and really look at early childhood education or school readiness or whatever those might be, we're going to have to operate together, not necessarily all putting our name on the same document, but all kind of moving in that same direction, and so the circles overlap enough so that we're creating an impact.
Lisa?
Hi, Lisa Glow with the Governor's Office. And my question has to do with government partnerships, and we are doing some partnerships with both of these foundations, but how do the trustees generally view those kind of partnerships? I do think it's really critical to have the cross-cutting kind of partnerships with both the public and the private to have leverage resources, but where do you see trustees, not just with your foundations, but others as well?
One of Nina's values that it was interesting in 1999 when I started with the trust, we had a staff retreat where Carol Shack came and presented a slide presentation on Aunt Nina, and then we had a trustee retreat and talked about Nina's values. One of the things that came out was that Nina had no patience for government. And she and Jean were strict libertarians. So we tend not to avoid public-private partnerships, but to certainly look at them with great skepticism, I would say. But we have entered into some, and I think I think the funding environment has changed. I also think that Arizona and Indiana are different states, and there are some issues here in Arizona that can be better and can only be met by public-private partnerships. And when we look at serving the basic good and contributing to basic needs in some of those issues, they can only be done by that partnership. So it's part of our role as staff to help educate trustees, and part of trustees' role to push back with, well, that's not what we're about, but our role of staff is always, I think, to try to push the ball forward in terms of how we can best interpret using those dollars to create community change. So that's our role as staff, it's their role as trustees, and it's a fun interplay.
Early childhood intervention issues, and which suggests to me that you're looking at preventative programs. Judy, you talked about an emphasis on being proactive and preventative programs, and I'm wondering, Ed, is Pulliam also moving in that direction as well?
Well, I think we've always had an eye on prevention, especially with early childhood education, with brain development, with some of those kinds of programs that not only educate the young child, but also bring parents in and do some of those kind of cross-generational kinds of programs. I'd say we have a good mix, and we're very responsive as a grant maker, I think, because we don't invite proposals. We basically respond to what comes to us. And so I think as we look at the broad cross-section of different proposals that are before us each round, and they change every round. It's really the luck of the draw many times for a prospective grantee, what cycle they come in on and what they're being faced with. But I think we always have an eye toward prevention, and my heart's in prevention. I think the first chairman of the State Prevention Task Force in 1980 with Behavioral Health Associations, and worked with Carol Kratz when she was with MAG to just draw a line in the sand and say we're going to take 10% of social service block grant funds and put them toward prevention. So our heart is there, and so I think we try to do as much as we can in prevention.
We got a number of them over here. Who haven't we heard from? This gentleman back here. You, sir.
Hi, I'm Kevin Ferris. I'm with Survivors United. We're a recovery empowerment center here for the seriously mentally ill. I just started in January. I took over the CEO position. I inherited a very difficult and challenging fiscal irresponsibility organization, and we are now fiscally pretty sound. We've got everything in order and our T's and dots, everything done. But I know in a lot of times with grants, they're looking at history. We are 15 years old. We have a lot of new ideas, new things that we want to do to see how we can affect the community and bring the community into a partnership right around us. And one of the things that I know is difficult is that because the history that I inherited is a difficult piece. What would you say is our best way? Are we going to get told, oh, I'm sorry, but you don't have the history behind you now that is good playing on a player's field with grants?
I don't think we're that concerned with long history. History with individuals with us who have not represented the organization clearly probably should not come back to us for a grant. But new individuals who come into an organization, we're more than willing to work with. And I can think of one grant, for example, it was a capital project with a recovery organization building an apartment complex, went to the bank to draw out the funds from our grant, and the dollars weren't there. That executive director is no longer in that organization, but the new executive director, we have a wonderful relationship with that individual who assured us that he would make good our grant, and has done so, and is moving forward. So I don't think we hold an organization at fault. We will hold an individual in terms of, the old statement about whose fault. I'm going to that. But anyways, we will be more than happy to work with an individual. So.
I echo what Ed said. Where's Lynn Hoffman, our controller? Well, Lynn looks at the financials of any nonprofit we're considering funding really closely. And we've seen situations probably as shocking as yours in the past, but where there's clear evidence of the plan, of the progress, of the internal controls now in place, of the leadership, that's what counts then.
Hi, Lisa Benson, consultant, and I want to thank Dr. Portnoy for all he's done to my organizations, and Judy, we've not met yet, but first of all, in many of the cities that I work in, big foundations are not that accessible. We can't have conversations like this with executive directors of large foundations, so I want to thank you for get your staff, and we can get you and talk to you and send emails, and it's really appreciated for those of us who are out there fighting the good fight. But also, I want to thank you for having forums like this, because Mr. Harris, where are you? Don't leave here today without talking to me. I represent a client, Advocates for the Disabled, where 62% of our clientele are mentally and physically ill white males. And I see a partnership that might be able to work here. So, collaboration and a proposal.
Good. Other,
I just want to follow up, because Maricopa County is very blessed to have both of you as large foundations here and be so involved. In Southern Arizona, we don't, and now I'm statewide, and we just don't have a lot of big foundations. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are, your perspectives about what's happening nationally with foundations, and is Arizona on the radar map? We have many large employers, Texas Instruments, Honeywell, that have large workforces in Arizona, but I don't see a lot of foundation activity, or maybe it's happening in Maricopa County and we just don't see it in the rest of the state. But do you have any thoughts or suggestions on how to be on the radar map for the big foundations?
Let me come at this a couple of ways. One of, as all of you, I suspect, know, there is a major public policy discussion going on in Congress about abuses of nonprofits and foundations, greater accountability of nonprofits and foundations, and I think we'll see proposed legislation probably the next 4 to 6 weeks from Senator Gleason.
Can I just talk and
So I think there's a national issue about public accountability for foundations that we all have to recognize, deal with, and I think it's very much our responsibility to explain to the general public as well as to public officials what is it that foundations do. I mean, I don't know whether you all have discovered this, but if you say you work for a foundation, you get a look on, I mean, if you're in, the real world, that just they don't know. So I think there's something we've got to do there. You remember the report that the Arizona Grantmakers Forum did in conjunction with ASU on philanthropy in Arizona, and we know we're younger, we know we're thinner, we know the dollars aren't there, even though there's been explosive growth over the last 10 years. So we're not on the map in the way that we would like to be or some of the other states. I think we're getting there, though. I mean, I think there's a lot more interest in things that are going on. There are more partnerships going on between foundations in Arizona and national foundations than there have been. Kellogg, remember, came in and gave Arizona Grantmakers Forum, $200,000 to strengthen this organization because they think philanthropy really needs to be strengthened in the state. They gave over $4 million to ASU's Center for Nonprofit Leadership and Management because they think Arizona can invent a new model of sort of support for nonprofits different than anything in the more traditional, regions of the country. So I would say we're beginning to get more attention than we have in the past, but how we bring more dollars into the state may not be as ultimately as successful a strategy as how we build philanthropy in the state. I mean, there is great wealth in this state that is not yet in the pipeline, and that's a challenge for all of us.
Hi, Nita Francis, community volunteer now, but in response to that, and this may be heresy for people who are seeking funds and for those who are giving funds, but I'm sitting here thinking about 4 years ago, we were going after a Robert Wood Johnson grant, trying to be one of $10 million grantees in the nation. And we didn't get that grant, we came that close. But we had a project that worked very, very well, and because we didn't get the $1 million, all of the hospitals in Maricopa County came together, not seeking funds, but the project was going anyway. And they collaborated without asking for any money. And I think if I was managing $1 million, as naive as I was at the time, nobody would have come without getting paid. And I think there is a wonderful model. Not that you should not fund great projects, but that a little money, and thank you St. Luke's who started that project, was leveraged with other local things to do local good that now has gone to a national scale. We are funded by Ronald McDonald House Charities to do it on a national scale. But I still think that we were perfect for Robert Wood Johnson and didn't get the money. But my point is, a little bit of money causes collaboration. Maybe a large amount, when it's not able to be managed yet, does not always work that way.
Thank you. It oftentimes isn't about the money at all, frankly.
Hi, my name is Mason Zerby, and I'm the CEO of a nonprofit organization that rescues cats. 6,400 last year. We won the National Cat Organization of the Year Award. But I wanted to mention, since you brought it up, that legislation, and coincidentally, my brother is in charge of that legislation. He is the senior tax counsel in the Senate. That's my brother. I'm his big brother. And you wouldn't believe how many people, I just got back from a year in Iowa. I was the fundraiser for Senator Grassley, who's the chairman of the Finance Committee. And you would not believe how many people have pilloried me with phone calls seeking to get a hold of my brother and to give comments to me. So if you're seeking, if you'd like to let me know what you think, I do email him on a regular basis. And I probably don't agree with him on a lot of the stuff, but anyway, that's another story. Anyway, the question that, but if there is anything I can do, it sounds like you're talking to him directly, that's good. You guys see things from up here, and I just wonder, do you have any insights or thoughts or see any trends going on in Maricopa County that you might like to share with us? I know we're the fastest growing county in the country. What are you seeing out there? Just, problems or solutions, just on any topic that you might want to share with us?
Oh, I'd like to get into that one. Go ahead. No. Well, never give me a mic. What we see in this environment is there's both a plus and a minus. On the minus side first, the weakness here is the growing fragmentation of interest groups built around ideologies, narrowly defined self-interest, kind of what I would call the various kinds of turf wars organized around values, economics. And because of the transitory nature of the environment we live in, which is, one of the highest churn rates in the world probably, it's very hard to form those kinds of lasting partnerships and initiatives that frankly take years to unfold. The hardest thing to teach a foundation board and staff is that oftentimes when you get into these things, you're not going to get it done in 2 or 3 years. It could take you 10 years to get something done. And a lot of people don't have the patience. But I think what Judy mentioned here is the emerging model. That weakness is also our strength, because the power structure here is horizontal and rather flat compared to the vertical power structures of more mature cities. We are able to get in and see people like Judy and like Ed and like the governor and other people in positions of influence, you can get in and see these folks a lot more easily here than you can in other places. And while those relationships are more transitory and ad hoc, I would, predict that the model of being able to use that kind of just-in-time social change, that we can begin to model some things here that you can't do in other types of places. As I think the world is increasingly going to look like Phoenix rather than Phoenix looking like the rest of the world. Comments?
Good. I think growth is the critical issue. We know that we're going to be, 10 million here in the valley by 2040. We know that only 0.5% of our young people go on to graduate school. We know what our dropout rate is. We know that I think, put bluntly, we'll either figure out how to do growth in a sustainable, intelligent way, and as Roger says, then become the model for the new American city and for the new West, or we won't figure out how to do it, and I think by then we will be a very large quasi-third world city. And so I think the stakes are so high, and there seem to be so many people in this community recognizing that. And instead of being absolutely daunted and worn down by this churning, this explosive growth, the thinness of some of our resources, are really thinking very creatively about how we leapfrog past old models toward new ones, that we don't just try. And so I'm fundamentally optimistic, but I think when you look at the projections for this, county, let alone the state, the numbers are simply staggering.
I would just say that the most difficult part, I think, that we have in reviewing organizations and the just explosion of nonprofit organizations as well in this state to match the growing population is the difference between organizations and individuals who have a 501c3. And since we fund startups, we get a lot of proposals from 501c3s that are basically a husband and wife and 3 friends who are really doing something that their heart is in. And they're, in their minds, they're doing great work. And I think there's a fear from the established nonprofit community that if only funders knew who the good guys were, that they would get the money. And we see all these new groups coming in here, and they are a threat to the established nonprofits. And so I think if you see trends, I think it's toward accreditation of some sort, of having some kind of standard. And I congratulate those nonprofits who've gone through an accreditation program or a Drucker model or any of those kinds of things that show organizational capacity. But I think we have a real division between the organizations who are established in the community and the fear that new emergent organizations are going to compete for the shrinking dollars that are around in a community to start with. So I think that interplay is a real tough one, and I think there's going to be some shakeout with that. And also the need, I think that it just points to the Robert Ashcrafts of the world and others to help develop the nonprofit community.
Well, it's almost 1:30, and I think this has been a great discussion, and I want to thank you all for coming. And one of the things that we love to hear from you is ideas for more forums like this, because I'm speaking, I know, for Judy and Ed, and certainly speaking for myself, we learn a lot from listening to you talk about your experiences and what you see as important. So these kinds of dialogues and presentations are good. And I'm going to close, and I'm going to hand this over to Marissa for final comments.
We have a Piper Fellows program for nonprofit leaders like people in this room. The announcement of the next year's Piper Fellows program will come out in June. Watch your mailboxes. think seriously about applying. There's sabbaticals for up to 2 months, up to $30,000.
That's the foundation.
And if you aren't ready, but if you know somebody else, let me just urge you to take advantage of that.
Okay, first of all, just a round of applause for our wonderful panel and moderator. And certainly a round of applause for all of you. This exceeded my expectations. It was like being in a large salon. So just wonderful. I would appreciate those yellow sheets on your tables. Please fill them out.